Welcome back to the deep dive. I want to start today by asking you a question that might sound a little ridiculous. Do you feel solid?
Solid, like physically solid.
Yeah, like if you poke your arm, it stops your finger. You look in the mirror, you see a distinct shape. You feel like a permanent fixed object just walking around in the world.
I mean, I certainly hope so. I checked in the mirror this morning and everything seemed to be right where I left it.
Well, hold on to that thought because today we are going to completely dismantle it.
Oh boy.
Yeah. We're diving into a topic that suggests that this solidity is, well, it's a bit of an illusion. We're talking about oceans, waves, and the very confusing, sometimes incredibly stubborn thing we call the ego.
It's a fascinating topic and
Mhm.
surprisingly relevant to anyone who has ever, woken up feeling stiff for no apparent reason
Yeah.
or maybe refused to wear a sweater because it just didn't feel right.
Right, exactly. Or had a random hunch about a broken car that turned out to be weirdly accurate.
Yeah, that ESP experiment is wild.
It really is. Now, before we jump into the deep end, let's get our housekeeping out of the way. This deep dive is distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes. We're here to explore, analyze, and learn from the source material provided.
Absolutely. And today's source material is a very specific, incredibly dense slice of the Seth material.
Yes, we are diving into session 319.
Recorded on a cold winter night, February 13th, 1967. This comes directly from the early sessions, Book 7 of the Seth material.
Published by the New Awareness Network.
Right. And you really have to picture the setting here. It's Elmira, New York, 1967. It's winter. There are no smartphones, no internet distractions.
Just a very chill vibe. Literally chill, considering the upstate New York winter.
Yeah, totally. Just Jane Roberts, her husband Rob, and this incredible consciousness known as Seth coming through to basically drop some profound knowledge right in their living room.
And the mission for this deep dive is, well, we've got a lot of ground to cover. We're going to talk about why your physical pains might actually be your personality being stubborn.
Which is a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people.
Oh, for sure. We're also going to get into the battle of the sweaters, which is honestly hilarious but deeply psychological. And then we'll break down that chillingly accurate ESP experiment with the piece of canvas.
The one that reveals how objects aren't just things, but like hubs of connected information.
Exactly. But let's start with the heavy lifting, the philosophical foundation. Seth opens the session with an analogy that I think is just beautiful. It totally changes how you see yourself.
He addresses the nature of the ego.
Yeah.
Now, this is a term that gets thrown around a lot. In modern psychology or casual conversation, we think of the ego as arrogance, like having a big ego.
Right, or we think of it as the pilot of the ship, the actual me making the decisions.
Seth asks us to reframe that entirely. He wants you to imagine the whole self, the entire entity of who you are, conscious and subconscious, as an enormous ocean.
An ocean.
Yeah. Vast, deep, darkened places full of currents and life. Now imagine the topmost wave on that ocean, just that surface movement that rises up, catches the light, takes a specific shape for a moment.
Okay.
That wave, that is the ego.
So I am the wave, the part of me that is sitting here talking to you right now.
Yes. The part of you that you think is you, the part that navigates the physical world, pays the bills, talks to people, that is the wave. But the key distinction Seth makes here is that the wave is not separate from the ocean. It is of the ocean.
That's a crucial difference. You can't go to the beach, pick up a wave, put it in your pocket, and walk away.
No, you definitely can't.
It's just the ocean doing a specific motion at a specific time.
Precisely. And think about the physics of a wave. What does it do? It rises, it takes a form, it crashes, it tumbles back under, and then it emerges again in a new form. It is a process of constant change. It's dynamic.
It has to move. If a wave stops moving, it's literally not a wave anymore.
And that is exactly where the problem arises, according to Seth. The trouble starts when the wave decides it doesn't want to crash.
It wants to stay a wave forever, freeze in midair at the highest point.
Seth calls this frozen motion. He says when it attempts to hold the upper position indefinitely, there is frozen motion and built-up pressures.
Which makes sense physically, right? If you try to hold millions of tons of water up against gravity, you're fighting the entire ocean. You're fighting the momentum of the universe.
And the inevitable result is that the wave will tumble under. It has to. Reality wins. That tumbling under is what we might experience as sleep or a change in mood or shifting life phases.
Or a breakdown.
Sometimes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But Seth views this tumbling not as a failure, but as a necessity. It's how the ego renews itself. Without that cycle of dipping back into the subconscious, the ego becomes brittle. It loses its meaning.
This is where it gets really interesting to me because we tend to think of stability as a good thing. We say, oh, he's a stable guy. She has a stable personality.
Right, we praise that.
But Seth seems to be saying that too much stability is actually rigidity.
He says explicitly, any attempt at rigidity is therefore defeating. He introduces this fascinating concept that the ego isn't even a static cast of characters. It's not one person.
Wait, run that by me again, because I feel like the same person I was at breakfast.
You feel that way because of memory. But Seth argues that the ego is more like a sports team, where the roster changes depending on who we're playing against. He says the self throws up those portions of itself that it considers most able to handle the changing physical environment.
Throws up in the sense of bringing to the surface.
Right. So what you call today your conscious ego might be completely different from who you are tomorrow, or even later this afternoon.
I love that analogy. So if I'm in an emergency, my crisis ego tags in. That part of me is cool, collected, maybe a bit adrenaline fueled. But if I'm at a dinner party, my social ego tags in. Charming, talkative.
Exactly. And if you're doing your taxes, your logical ego takes over.
What?
The problem is when we make the mistake of thinking we have to be the exact same person all the time.
We find a version of ourselves that works in one situation, and we try to freeze it. We say, this is who I am the stubborn one, or I am the hard worker.
And we hold on to that hard worker identity even when we're on vacation. We hold on to the stubborn identity even when we really just need to compromise.
And that's the frozen motion.
That's the wave trying to stay up. And Seth warns that what is ego today might belong to the subconscious tomorrow. It's supposed to be fluid, but we get scared of that fluidity. We want to be solid.
We want to be the rock, not the water.
But we are the water. And when we try to be the rock, we create friction, we create pressure, and often that pressure manifests physically in the body.
Which brings us directly to the case study in this session, because we aren't just talking abstract philosophy here. We're looking at Rupert. And for newer listeners, Rupert is the name Seth uses for Jane Roberts' greater entity.
Right. Jane is the physical person, Rupert is the whole entity. In this session, Jane was having a really rough time physically.
Yeah, the session notes are pretty descriptive. She wasn't just feeling a little off. She was dealing with serious swelling, stiffness, pain in her knees and feet.
She was very uncomfortable.
And usually in our modern world, we just say, oh, take an aspirin, you've got inflammation. Or you're just getting older.
But Seth goes much deeper. He diagnoses this not as a biological failure, but as a psychological rigidity manifesting physically. He says her ego wanted to stay where it was. It became frozen motion.
So Jane was trying to keep her personality static, and her body paid the price.
Essentially, yes. The ego she was presenting to the world was one that had been very useful to her in the past. It was a survival ego. Seth mentions that in the past, stubbornness was actually a virtue for her. It helped her survive difficult situations.
Right, like if you're in a tough environment, maybe a bad childhood, being hard-headed keeps you alive. It's a shield.
Correct. But she wasn't in that environment anymore. She was safe. She was with Rob. She was channeling Seth. The circumstances had entirely changed, but the ego behavior hadn't. It was trying to maintain dominancy over the subconscious.
It didn't want to let any new information or new parts of her personality surface. It was saying, nope, I am the captain, I am the stubborn survivor, and we are not changing course.
And because that energy has to go somewhere, remember the built-up pressures, it went directly into her body. It's the law of conservation of energy applied to psychology. If you block the flow of the ocean, the pressure builds up behind the dam.
Let's unpack the specific symptoms, because this is where the body as a symbol concept gets incredibly literal. It's almost like dream interpretation, but for physical pain.
It is fascinating. Let's start with the swelling in the feet. Seth connects this to a past life inclination to gluttony.
Whoa, okay, hold on. So in a past life, she ate too much, got gout, and now she has phantom gout. That sounds a little deterministic.
It's more subtle than that.
Okay.
Seth says there's an imprinting process. The previous inclination to overconsume led to gout in the past. That created a neurological or psychic pathway. Now, in this life, even though she isn't gluttonous in the same way, that overextension of tissue, the swelling, is manifesting as a physical symbol.
A symbol of what, exactly?
Of expansion, of taking up space. But because she is blocking her psychological expansion, the body expands instead. It's the old pattern reemerging because the current ego is stuck.
That is wild. So the body is running an old script because the mind won't write a new one.
Exactly. And then there are the morning symptoms. Apparently her symptoms were way worse in the morning. which I think a lot of people can relate to, waking up stiff and sore.
Oh, absolutely. The morning rust.
Seth gives a very direct psychological reason for this. He says the morning symptoms represent earlier fears of facing the day.
Oof. That hits close to home. It's not just, oh, I slept wrong. It's, I don't want to do this.
It is the body manifesting resistance to waking reality. The ego is reluctant to take up the burden of being the wave again. But the most specific and, frankly, kind of heartbreaking detail is about her knees. Jane had significant knee pain.
This is the part that gave me chills. The accuracy is just, it's so specific.
It really is. Seth links this directly to her childhood at a Catholic school, St. Vincent.
St. Vincent's.
Seth explains that at St. Vincent's, the punishment for the children was to kneel straight upward on the floor.
Wait, clarify straight upward.
Not sitting back on your heels, which gives your legs some rest, but kneeling completely upright, thighs vertical, full weight on the kneecaps.
Oh, that is brutal. That engages the quads, puts massive pressure on the patella. That starts hurting within seconds.
It's incredibly painful.
Yeah.
And imagine doing this as a child. You're doing this while being told you've done something wrong, you've sinned, you are bad.
So you have physical agony completely paired with deep shame.
Exactly. The physical pain becomes wired together with the feeling of a lack of understanding or moral failure. So now, as an adult, when Jane feels she lacks understanding, maybe she's struggling with the psychic work or feeling inadequate, she unconsciously punishes herself in the exact same way.
Her knees hurt.
Her knees hurt. The body remembers the punishment.
She is literally putting herself in the corner at Catholic school.
Psychologically, yes. And the body follows suit. Seth says the knee symptoms were a later development, his way of punishing himself for his previous lack of understanding.
It really makes you wonder about chronic pain. How much of it is us unconsciously reenacting some old trauma?
Seth would argue a significant amount. And the cure? Seth says just knowing this should help relieve it. It's like bringing the monster out from under the bed. Once you see it's just a memory of a punishment, a ghost from St. Vincent's, you can let it go. You don't need to punish yourself anymore.
That is the power of this kind of deep psychospiritual analysis. It turns vague pain into actionable information. Instead of just, my knee hurts, it's, oh, I'm feeling guilty, I need to stop kneeling.
There was one more general symptom Seth mentioned. The immobility itself. The frozenness.
The wait-and-see symptom.
Yes. Seth says the physical immobility represented caution. She didn't want to move until she was completely sure of her direction. Her ego was so stubborn it blocked the directions coming from her inner self. So she literally paralyzed herself to avoid making a wrong move.
It's amazing how the mind works. It's like, if I don't move, I can't mess up.
Right. It's perfectionism paralyzed.
But then your body screams, hey, we need to move. We are biological machines designed for motion.
And this conflict creates those built-up pressures Seth talked about in the wave analogy. The water wants to flow, the wave wants to freeze. The result is total turbulence.
Now, speaking of conflict, we have to talk about the sweaters.
Ah, yes. The battle of the sweaters. This is a lighter moment in the session, but the psychology is just as heavy.
This part had me laughing out loud when I read it, but it's also deeply tragic in a way. It's a perfect example of how we attach intense meaning to objects.
It is a classic example of what Seth calls mother identification. So the backstory here is that for years, Rupert Jane hid her true self from her mother. She felt that if she shared her inner world or the book she was writing, she was making herself vulnerable.
Right. And from what we know of Jane's biography, her mother was a very difficult figure, manipulative, demanding. So Jane developed this hard rule: I will not wear anything that has been close to her.
A literal physical barrier. If it touched Mom, it cannot touch me. But then she tried to overcome this. She was trying to force herself to be mature about it. She received some sweaters that were strongly associated with her mother.
And logically, you'd just say, well, it's cold in upstate New York. It's a sweater. It's just wool. I'll wear it.
That is the ego talking. The logic. I am an adult. I can wear a cardigan.
Yeah.
But the subconscious said, absolutely not. Seth says she automatically rejected the sweaters because they provided warmth on a subconscious basis. And warmth equals mother.
So wearing the sweater actually felt like being hugged by the mother she was trying so hard to escape?
Precisely. It felt like being cast in her world. So the sweaters just sat in the drawer.
I just picture them sitting there menacingly. The haunted cardigans.
And here is where the phrase in motion, the stubbornness, really kicks in. Jane finally decided to wear one. But she didn't just wear it casually. Seth says she wrote a letter protesting too much, and then wore it night and day in a frenzied attempt to prove that it had no harmful effects upon her.
She wrote a thank you letter that was way too enthusiastic and then wore the sweater like armor, just trying to prove she didn't care.
Which, of course, proves she cared immensely.
Huh.
From the subconscious standpoint, this was an assault. She was forcing a connection she wasn't emotionally ready for. She was trying to use sheer willpower to crush a deep emotional trigger.
And then there's the bra incident. This is another layer of the exact same problem.
Yes, Jane would sometimes go without a bra while working because her shoulders bothered her. Sounds totally reasonable, right?
Sure. Comfort, ergonomics while typing.
But Seth points out the hidden link. Her mother never wore a bra, and Jane had an image of herself as having thin shoulders. Seth says the thin shoulders he imagines he has are a part of mother identification.
So by taking off the bra and feeling her shoulders were thin and weak, she was physically morphing into her mother.
She was identifying with the mother's physical form. And Seth notes that Jane, who had been male in many past lives, hence the name Rupert, often tried to manhandle these feminine aspects. She tried to use force and logic to beat her intuition into submission.
I will wear the sweater. I will ignore the feelings. I will use logic.
Exactly. And that creates the friction. That creates the stiffness in the body. It's a literal war between the conscious mind, the wave, and the subconscious feelings, the ocean.
It's a powerful lesson. We can't just bully our subconscious into submission. We have to understand why it's reacting the way it is. If you force the sweater, you just get stiff shoulders.
And that leads us perfectly into the second half of this deep dive. Because if the first half was about the internal blocks, the stubborn ego, the frozen wave, the second half is about what happens when you bypass the ego entirely.
When you let the wave tumble under.
Exactly, when you tap into that massive ocean of connection.
It is time for the ESP experiment. Experiment number 84.
Now, for context, Seth would often conduct these tests to prove the validity of the inner senses, senses beyond the physical. Rob would seal an object in double envelopes, so there was absolutely no way to see it, touch it directly, or smell it.
And Jane, in a trance state, would try to guess what it was, or rather, describe her impressions of it.
And remember, Jane actually felt like this particular experiment was a failure. She came out of the trance thinking, I got nothing. I was all over the place. My impressions were random.
Which is often a good sign, ironically.
Yeah.
It means the conscious mind, the ego, wasn't interfering by trying to make sense of the images. It wasn't trying to force the raw data into a neat logical box.
So let's reveal the target object to you, the listener, first. What was in the envelope?
It was a strip of linen artist's canvas. Rob had purchased it at a local art shop in Elmira.
Can you describe the object more specifically?
Sure. It was rectangular, sturdy. It had a rough woven texture. It had some tack holes along the top edge where it had been stretched on a frame previously. The top edge was frayed, and it was glued onto a piece of masonite board.
Okay, so we have canvas, glued to board, rough texture, frayed edge, tack holes. Pretty specific physical characteristics. Now let's look at what Jane, completely aligned to this, picked up.
Her first impressions were very sensory. She didn't just say canvas, she described the feeling of it. She used the word sturdy. Then she said stubble or stumble.
Stubble. That is a great description of raw canvas. It's rough. It catches your hand a bit like a beard.
Exactly. It's a perfect tactile hit. Then she said, small squares, perhaps 3 of these.
If you look at woven canvas under a light or a magnifying glass, what do you see?
A grid. Thousands of tiny squares where the threads cross over each other.
Right. She's zooming in on the texture, and she mentioned holes in it, or torn, which perfectly matches the tack holes and the frayed edge where it had been cut.
Okay, so she's got the texture, she's got the physical damage, the holes, but then she gets the sensation of something being glued.
She says, connection with a fabric that somehow seems glued on.
That is a direct hit. It's not just fabric, it's fabric glued on.
And not just visually. Rob notes in the session that he had really struggled with gluing this specific piece of canvas. He used a polymer glue. He had to wet the canvas. It was a whole frustrating process. Jane picked up on the effort and the sensation of the gluing.
That's the emotional resonance we were talking about.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets genuinely spooky, the Tom connection.
This is my favorite part of the session because it shows how information is actually stored in the universe. It's not filed under object, it's filed under associations.
Jane starts getting these weird, seemingly random images. She sees an old car, she sees a gasoline connection, she talks about erratic behavior and stripping gears. Then she sees a view of water and a high window.
Now, if you're just looking for a piece of canvas, these sound like complete misses. What does a car have to do with canvas?
Exactly. That's why Jane thought she was failing the test. She's sitting there thinking, why am I seeing a car? I'm supposed to be seeing what's inside the envelope.
But Rob and Seth connect the dots. Where did Rob buy the canvas?
The art shop.
And who works at the art shop?
A guy named Tom.
A guy named Tom, who was a friend of theirs. And what does Tom drive?
An old sports car.
And what had happened to Tom recently?
He had just stripped the gears in his car.
Exactly. The object, the canvas, was purchased from Tom. So the psychic fingerprint of the canvas included Tom.
That is incredible. So the object isn't isolated. It carries its history with it.
And Tom's strongest emotional broadcast at that time was his frustration with his car. He was probably thinking about those stripped gears while he was cutting the canvas for Rob.
So she's holding the canvas, but she's turning into the guy who sold it.
And it goes further. She mentions a view of water and a high window.
Okay, let's trace that one.
The art shop is located on West Water Street in Elmira.
West Water Street. Literal water in the name.
And the shop backs up to the Chemung River.
Hmm?
There's a literal view of water from the back of the building. But the high window.
Where does Tom work in the shop?
Tom works in the second-story workroom. He frames pictures up there. There is a large high window where he looks down on the street.
And the notes say he actually waves to Jane from that window when she walks by.
Yes. It's a station from which activities may be viewed, as Jane described it. So the canvas acted like a link. It linked to the shop, which linked to the street, which linked to Tom, which linked to the window, and the broken car.
It's a web. It's not just I see a square piece of cloth. It's I see everything this cloth has touched or been involved with.
This validates Seth's ocean analogy perfectly. The canvas is just a wave. But if you touch the wave, you are touching the ocean. And in the ocean, the canvas is connected to Tom, to the river, to the car. There are no actual separations.
That explains why she also saw red and yellow squares. Rob hadn't painted on this specific canvas yet, but he bought it to paint abstract squares in red and yellow.
She was picking up the intent of the object, the future of the object, as it existed in Rob's mind.
It really blurs the line between mind and matter. The object isn't just physical matter. It's a bundle of thoughts, intentions, and history.
And memories. Remember, Seth said, the stability of the whole self is dependent upon the mobility of each portion of the self. In the ESP experiment, Jane's mind had to be mobile. It had to follow these invisible threads, to Tom, to the car, to the glue. If her ego had been rigid, if she had said, no, a canvas can't be a car, she would have blocked the impression entirely.
She would have censored the old car image because it didn't make logical sense to the conscious mind.
Exactly. The logic of the ego would have said, wrong category, discard. But the intuition knows that in the ocean of consciousness, everything is connected.
This brings us right back to the health issue, doesn't it? Rigidity versus mobility.
It does. There are two sides of the exact same coin. Jane's physical suffering came from rigidity, trying to hold the ego in one place, refusing to wear the sweater, refusing to acknowledge the mother parts of herself. The frozen motion caused pain.
And the success of the ESP experiment, even though she thought she failed, came from the subconscious flowing freely, picking up on these wild associative connections.
So the lesson is incredibly consistent. Flow, movement, acceptance. When we try to freeze the world or freeze ourselves, we get stuck. We get swollen joints. We get stiff knees. When we allow ourselves to be the wave that tumbles under and comes back up, we tap into a much larger source of information and energy.
Seth even mentions that Rupert's disinclination to walk outside was another instance of mother identification. It's like every little resistance was a symbol pointing to the same problem.
It forces us to look at our own lives. Where are we being rigid? Where are we refusing to wear the sweater?
Or where are we punishing ourselves for something that happened 20 years ago, like the kneeling at St. Vincent's?
It is a profound question. If your body is a symbol of your inner state, what is your body trying to tell you right now?
That's the question of the hour.
Yeah.
You know, going through this session 319, it's amazing how much is packed into just one evening of conversation.
Yeah.
We've got deep metaphysics, we've got medical intuitive diagnosis, and we've got a remote viewing test.
It is characteristic of the Seth Material. It bridges the gap between the practical and the mystical so well.
Yeah.
It doesn't just say we are all one. It says we are all one, and here's exactly why your knee hurts, and here's why you knew about Tom's car.
It grounds the woo-woo.
It really does. It makes it actionable.
So if we boil this down for you, the listener who might be driving or washing dishes or maybe knitting a sweater right now, what are the key takeaways?
First, remember the ocean and the wave. You are the wave, yes. You have a distinct shape for a moment, but you are also the ocean. Don't be afraid to tumble under. Don't be afraid to change your mind, your identity, or your approach. Rigidity is the enemy.
Second takeaway.
Listen to your body as a messenger. If you have a persistent ache or stiffness, ask yourself, where am I being stubborn? What part of myself am I trying to freeze? It might not just be bad posture, it might be an old survival ego that is past its expiration date.
And third,
Trust your intuition, even when it seems completely illogical. If you get an impression of an old car when you're looking at a piece of canvas, don't dismiss it. The web of reality is built on associations, not just physical proximity.
and wear the sweater if you're cold. Don't let your subconscious beef with your mother freeze you out.
Absolutely, sometimes a cardigan is just a cardigan, but usually it's a lot more.
Before we wrap up, we have to encourage you to go to the source. We're just skimming the surface here. If you compare the whole self with an ocean, then the topmost wave at any given time would represent the ego. We've barely touched the wave of this material.
We really haven't. If this resonates with you, you need to read the books. This was session 319 from the early sessions, book 7. You can find these books through the New Awareness Network.
And the best place to find them is at sethcenter.com/the early-sessions. That is the hub. Support the publisher who keeps this amazing material available.
It is a lifetime of study, really, and it rewards you every single time you dip back in.
We hope this deep dive has given you something to chew on. It certainly made me think about my own frozen motions.
It raises a provocative final thought for me.
What's that?
If your ego is just a wave, and the tumbling under is where you get your true power and renewal, what part of the ocean are you suppressing right now that might be trying to surface to help you?
Right.
What talent, what emotion, what weird intuition are you holding down because it doesn't fit your current character?
That is a great question. Maybe it's time to let the wave crash.
Let it crash and see what form you take next.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Until next time.
Stay fluid.